Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at something that I think affects pretty much every pet owner out there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how vets prescribe and dispense medication.
Right.
Now, you might think that this is a pretty simple topic,
Yeah.
but trust me,
It's not.
it can get surprisingly complicated.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
And to help us unpack all of this, we have a ton of research and news articles from all over the world.
Wow.
We've got stuff from the U.S.,
Right. Yeah.
Australia,
Right.
Japan,
Nice.
and of course, we'll be taking a look at those recent changes that have happened in Spain.
It's interesting because no matter where you look, the veterinarian is always at the center of the system.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're the gatekeepers.
Okay.
They're the ones with the knowledge and the authority to decide which medications are safe and effective for our pets.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they are the experts,
Right.
but then things get a little more complicated when we look at what happens after the vet writes that prescription.
Yeah.
Where can pet owners actually go to get those meds for their furry friends?
Well, that's where we see a lot of variation between different countries.
Okay.
Some countries like the US and Australia have a bit of a mixed approach.
Yeah.
Vets can often dispense medication right from their clinics, which is super convenient for a lot of owners.
Oh, for sure.
But you can also take that prescription to a regular pharmacy and sometimes even find lower prices at places like Walmart.
Wait, Walmart
Yeah.
for pet meds?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, I get it. Everybody loves a good deal,
Right.
especially if your pet needs to be on medication long term.
Right.
But I'm sure that raises some eyebrows amongst pharmacists.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a debate brewing about the role of pharmacists in all of this.
Interesting.
In Japan, for example, vets have historically been the primary dispensers, but pharmacists are starting to have a bigger role,
Okay.
although they haven't completely replaced the vet just yet.
So Japan is kind of moving towards a more collaborative approach.
It seems that way.
What about Spain? They've been in the news a lot recently for making some pretty big changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Spain's new legislation, RD 6666/2023, is really shaking things up by enforcing a stricter separation between vets and pharmacists.
Okay.
So now vets have to issue electronic prescriptions, which can only be filled by authorized pharmacies.
Interesting.
The goal here is to tighten control over medication use, especially when it comes to antibiotics.
Okay, that makes sense. But I can't help but think about all the practical challenges that come with something like that. Like, what happens in an emergency if a pet needs medication immediately?
That's a great point, and it's actually been a big point of contention with this new system in Spain.
I see.
There was a really tragic case recently involving a dog named Selva.
Oh, no.
Her owners claim that her treatment was delayed because of these new regulations,
Oh, wow.
and sadly, she passed away.
That's awful.
This has sparked a huge debate about the balance between bureaucratic control and actually ensuring that animals get timely care.
That's heartbreaking, and it really highlights how important it is to consider all of the potential consequences before making these kinds of changes.
Absolutely.
I mean, the vet is still the one making the call on the medication. Right.
Exactly. And even with these shifts in dispensing, the veterinarian is still at the center of the process, making sure that medication is used responsibly.
Okay.
It's really just the where and the how of getting that medication that's changing.
Nice.
But as we saw with Selva's case, those changes don't always come without problems.
Definitely. A lot to think about.
Yeah.
So we've got the U.S. and Australia with their flexible system, Japan moving towards more collaboration, and Spain making a clear separation. It seems like everyone's trying to figure out the best way to balance things.
I think that's a fair assessment.
What I'm really curious about, though, is what do the vets themselves think about all of this?
Yeah.
Do they feel like their role is being undermined or supported by these changes?
That's a great question, and it really depends on who you ask. Let's start with the American Veterinary Medical Association, or the AVMA for short.
Okay.
They're essentially the voice of vets in the U.S.,
Got it.
and they are extremely protective of their right to prescribe medication.
So the AVMA wants to maintain the status quo.
Well, not entirely.
Okay.
While they strongly defended their prescribing authority, which, by the way, the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, reaffirmed in 2024,
Okay.
they're not completely against change. They're actually pretty involved in conversations about how telemedicine can be safely integrated into veterinary care.
Telemedicine for pets. That sounds pretty futuristic. So even the AVMA is recognizing the potential of all this new technology.
It seems so. And they're not alone. The Australian Veterinary Association, or AVA, has a similar stance. Like, the AVMA, they want vets to retain prescribing authority, but they acknowledge that the way care is delivered is changing.
Okay.
They're particularly focused on updating those regulations around telemedicine.
It must be tricky to find a balance between using technology and making sure that the quality of care doesn't suffer.
It is a tough one.
So both the US and Australia are looking ahead, but cautiously. What about Japan? Are they on board with this whole telemedicine thing?
The Japan Veterinary Medical Association, the JVMA, initially had some reservations about telemedicine,
Yeah.
but they've actually come around and are now supporting its careful integration.
Really?
Yeah, they've recognized that it could make a huge difference in improving access to care, especially in those more rural areas.
It's fascinating to see how these veterinary associations are adapting to this constantly changing world.
It is.
And I bet Spain's new system is causing a lot of debate among vets over there.
Oh, absolutely. Initially, Spanish veterinary organizations actually worked together on that new law, but they've become increasingly critical of it.
Oh, wow.
They're now demanding that the government makes adjustments to reduce all that administrative burden and also to prevent delays in those critical care situations like we saw with Selva.
It sounds like Spain is kind of a cautionary tale,
Yeah.
showing how important it is to get input from vets who are on the ground and to really think through all the real-world impacts before implementing these big changes.
Absolutely. Finding that balance between responsible oversight and making sure that animals get effective care is a real challenge.
Yeah.
And it's a global conversation with every country trying to figure out their own path.
Right. And while those paths might all look different, it seems like they all lead back to the veterinarian as being the most important person when it comes to ensuring animal health.
I think so.
Okay, well, let's take a closer look at how some of those paths are playing out. We've talked about how telemedicine is changing the game,
Yeah.
but how exactly is it being used, and what are the implications for the vet-client relationship?
Well, that's a really important question and something we'll be diving into after a quick break, so stay with us.
We'll be right back.
As we look at all these different approaches to veterinary care, it's becoming clear that telemedicine is a real game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that first part, we touched on how places like the US and Australia are starting to explore telemedicine a little bit.
Right.
But it sounds like the UK is really going all in. What's their take on it, and how's it going so far?
The UK is definitely leading the way,
Yeah.
and it's pretty amazing to see how they're embracing all the different possibilities.
Yeah.
Their veterinary governing body is called the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons,
Okay,
the RCVS for short.
got it.
They updated their guidelines in 2023 to allow remote prescribing in a lot more situations.
So no more mandatory in-person visits just to get a prescription.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is. They've basically put a lot of trust in the veterinarian's professional judgment.
Yeah.
The RCVS recognizes that vets are highly
Yeah.
trained professionals and that they can determine when telemedicine is appropriate and when a hands-on exam is actually necessary.
Right.
Of course, they've also put in some safeguards, especially when it comes to things like antibiotics.
That makes sense. Antibiotic resistance is a global concern.
It is.
We can't have them being prescribed without good reason.
For sure.
Are there any concrete examples of how this remote prescribing actually works in the UK?
Oh yeah, tons. Let's say your dog has a recurring ear infection.
Okay.
Instead of dragging your poor pup to the clinic every single time,
Yeah.
you could just have a video consultation with your vet.
Oh, okay.
They can assess everything remotely. Maybe you send some photos or videos, and if it's a straightforward case, they can just send that prescription straight to your pharmacy.
That's incredibly convenient and a lot less stressful for both the pet and the owner, I bet.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like the UK is setting a great example for how to do telemedicine responsibly and effectively.
Yeah, they're really paving the way.
What about the US? Any signs of them catching up?
Well, while federal law in the U.S. still says that initial vet-client-patient relationship, that VCPR we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
has to be established in person,
Okay.
things are starting to change at the state level.
Oh.
Some states are experimenting with their own laws that allow for those virtual VCPRs,
Okay.
but they're being very cautious, especially when it comes to antibiotics.
So it's kind of like a patchwork of different approaches going on, with some states being more progressive than others.
Exactly. Arizona and California are two states that have been pushing the envelope,
Okay.
recognizing that there's a need for more flexible options, especially for people who live in those more remote areas.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if these state-level experiments are going to eventually lead to wider adoption of telemedicine across the entire U.S.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Telehealth in human medicine has become super popular.
Okay.
So it's only natural for veterinary care to follow that trend. In fact, a recent study found that the global veterinary telehealth market is predicted to be worth over $2.5 billion by 2028.
Wow, that is huge. It seems like telemedicine is becoming less of a futuristic idea and more of an inevitable part of veterinary care. As this trend keeps growing, it'll be interesting to see how countries like Australia and Japan adapt.
For sure.
Australia, as we mentioned earlier, is still pretty much limiting telemedicine to follow-up care or advice within an existing VCPR.
Right.
But I have a feeling they might need to rethink those regulations pretty soon.
Yeah, I think so too.
And Japan, with their historically more conservative approach, might need to play a little bit of catch-up as well.
Yeah, maybe.
Do we know anything about how they're approaching telemedicine?
The information's a bit scarce, but it seems like they're starting to adopt it, but cautiously.
Okay.
And they're likely focusing on continuing care with existing patients, which makes sense because building trust is really important, that veterinarian client-patient relationship.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about someone's beloved pet.
Exactly.
That brings up a good point, though. What about that human element of veterinary care? How do you maintain that connection, that sense of trust, when you're relying on technology and screens? I personally love the convenience of telemedicine. But when it comes to my pets, I can't help but feel like something might be lost.
I understand, and I think it goes back to that double-edged sword we were talking about.
Yeah.
Telemedicine, when it's used thoughtfully, can actually improve communication between vets and pet owners.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about it. You could get those detailed post-visit instructions through a video chat. Or you could easily send follow-up photos of a wound that's healing.
Okay, yeah.
It could lead to a more engaged and informed pet owner.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way. But I could also see how it could easily go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
If it's not used carefully.
Of course. The risk is that the care becomes impersonal, almost transactional.
Right.
If a vet is just clicking through forms online and churning out prescriptions without really taking the time to engage with the owner, that's not good medicine.
No, that's not what we want. So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Exactly.
Using technology to our advantage, but not losing that personal touch that is so important to veterinary care.
You got it. And that balance might look different in different places, different countries, different regions, even different practices.
Right.
Ultimately, it's about the pet owner and the animal all feeling comfortable and confident in the care that's being provided.
Well said.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us perfectly to the final question we want to explore in this deep dive.
Okay.
Is that traditional model of veterinary care really sustainable in this increasingly digital world?
Right.
We've talked about all these changes happening globally, but what do they mean for the future of the veterinary profession?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll be discussing in our final part.
Okay, great.
We'll look at all the potential benefits and the drawbacks of these changes, and we'll also consider whether the veterinarian's role is being strengthened or weakened by all of this. So stay tuned, because this is where things get really interesting.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of veterinary prescriptions and dispensing. We've seen how different countries are approaching this whole thing, embracing telemedicine, rethinking the role of pharmacists.
Yeah.
But the big question that we need to address is whether the traditional model of veterinary care is really built to last in this digital age.
Yeah, it's the question on every vet's mind right now.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one.
For sure. On the one hand, we have all these amazing advances in technology that could make care more accessible and more efficient.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's this worry about losing that personal touch.
Of course.
That connection between the vet, the pet owner, and the animal.
Absolutely.
It's like trying to find that sweet spot between embracing innovation and preserving the things that have always made veterinary care so special.
Right.
But to really understand the stakes here, we need to look at what could go wrong. What are some of the potential downsides of moving away from that traditional model where the vet does everything?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the impact it could have on veterinary clinics themselves. In a lot of countries, dispensing medication is a really important source of income for vets.
Right.
If that income stream goes away, it could put a lot of strain on their businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, vets have a lot of overhead.
Oh, yeah.
Staff equipment, rent, utilities, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Losing that income from dispensing meds could force them to raise prices for their other services.
Right.
And that would make care less affordable for pet owners.
Exactly. And in a worst-case scenario, it could even lead to some clinics having to close down.
Oh, wow.
Especially in those rural areas where vets are already in short supply.
Right.
This could create these veterinary deserts where people have to travel really long distances just to get care for their animals.
That would be awful. especially for people who rely on their local vet, not just for routine checkups, but also for emergencies.
Right.
So there's a huge economic impact to think about here.
Absolutely.
But what about the impact on the quality of care itself? Does separating prescribing from dispensing automatically mean that the quality of care will go down?
That's a really good question, and it's not so simple. It really depends on how these changes are actually implemented.
Okay.
If it's done right, it could actually give vets more time to focus on what they're best at,
Okay.
diagnosing and treating animals.
Right.
They could spend less time on the business side of things and more time with their patients.
So less time filling prescriptions and more time actually being a doctor.
Exactly.
That sounds like a win-win for both vets and their patients.
It could be, but there's also the risk that vets might become a little bit disconnected from the medications that they're prescribing.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, if they're not the ones actually handling the medication, they might lose some of that practical knowledge and experience.
That's a good point. It's like the difference between reading about a surgical procedure in a textbook and actually doing it in the operating room.
Exactly. There's that hands-on understanding that you can really only gain through experience.
Right. So it sounds like vets will need to stay up to date on the latest medications, even if they're not the ones dispensing them.
Absolutely. They need to be experts in pharmacology.
Okay.
And be able to give their clients good advice on things like proper dosage and side effects.
So continuing education is going to be more important than ever for vets.
For sure.
Okay, so what about pharmacists?
Yeah.
Are they really equipped to handle all the complexities of animal medications?
Well, that's another big piece of the puzzle. As we mentioned earlier, some pharmacists are actually getting specialized training in veterinary pharmacology.
Oh, wow.
This is super important when you're dealing with compounded medications, which are those medications that are customized for specific animals.
Right, because you can't really have a one-size-fits-all approach when you're dealing with everything from tiny hamsters to giant horses.
Exactly.
But even with the extra training, can pharmacists truly replace a vet's understanding of their patients?
Well, that's a debate that's still ongoing.
Okay.
Ideally, we would want to see a really good communication and collaboration between vets and pharmacists.
Yeah.
Imagine a system where the vet sends over this detailed electronic prescription. That includes not just the medication, but also the animal's medical history, any allergies, and they might have other important information.
Right.
Then the pharmacist can double-check everything and make sure there are no problems.
That sounds like a much safer and more comprehensive approach than just handing someone a piece of paper with a scribbled prescription on it.
Absolutely. And technology is making this kind of seamless communication more and more possible.
Yeah.
But it requires both professions to be willing to adapt and to work together.
So it seems like the future of veterinary care might not be about the vet working alone.
Right.
It might be more of a team effort,
Exactly.
with pharmacists, vet techs, and other specialists all working together.
That's the idea.
And at the heart of it all will be the pet owner,
Of course.
who really has to step up and be an advocate for their animal's well-being.
Right.
They'll need to stay informed, ask questions, make sure they understand the care that their pet is getting.
Absolutely.
This has been an incredibly informative deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
It's clear that the world of veterinary care is changing rapidly.
It is.
There are a lot of exciting opportunities and also some serious challenges ahead.
For sure.
But if there's one thing we can be certain of, is that the bond between humans and animals is as strong as ever.
It is.
And we're going to keep finding ways to ensure that our furry, feathered, and scaled friends get the best possible care.
Absolutely. And who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll have AI-powered diagnostic tools, personalized gene therapies for pets, or even virtual reality vet visits. The possibilities are endless.
Well, on that note of endless possibilities, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise with us and for helping us make sense of this complex and constantly evolving world of veterinary care.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, keep those questions coming and stay curious.